Heavy drops of autumn rain drummed on black umbrellas, creating a monotonous, lulling hum that absorbed the widow's sobs and the quiet, perfunctory speeches of colleagues. The polished granite already bore the name, dates of birth, and the date of the end of life's journey. October 19th, 1962. People in strict coats approached the edge of the excavated earth, cast handfuls of damp clay onto the coffin lid, and then retreated, hiding their faces in their collars. It was a perfect picture of grief, a flawlessly staged performance of farewell to an eminent physicist whose heart, according to the official medical report, could not withstand the strain. None of those present, including his sister and closest assistants, could have suspected that in the expensive, velvet-lined box lay not the body of the scientist, but a masterfully balanced ballast mimicking the weight of a human body, and a wax doll whose face was hidden under a layer of post-mortem makeup and a white shroud. The real professor, at that very moment, was 300 kilometers from the cemetery, in a closed bunker beneath an inconspicuous sanatorium, watching his own funeral service on a grainy monitor screen, clutching a glass of cold tea in his hand. To the whole world, he had ceased to exist. His biography was complete, his passport annulled, and his pension accounts frozen. But for the system, he was just beginning his most important work. This is how, in silence and to the drumming of rain, a protocol known in narrow circles as oblivion was activated, the highest measure of secrecy, granting immortality through the complete erasure of identity. To understand how such a thing became possible, one must delve into the atmosphere of total paranoia and strategic planning of the mid-20th century. The world balanced on a razor's edge, and information became a currency more valuable than gold and oil. In this war of shadows, key figures, brilliant engineers, intelligence residents, strategic analysts became targets. Their elimination by the enemy could set national programs back decades, and their capture and subsequent re-recruitment threatened a catastrophe of planetary scale. Guarding them around the clock was impossible. Hiding them while they remained public figures was unrealistic. The only way to ensure absolute security and complete operational freedom was a radical solution. The subject had to officially leave this world. The logic was ironclad and frightening in its simplicity. No one seeks one who already rests beneath a tombstone. No one recruits a dead man. No one expects a blow from a ghost. The Oblivion Protocol was not a spontaneous reaction to a threat. It was a complex, bureaucratic, and operational machine that created an alternative reality in which everyone believed, from neighbors on the landing to analysts of enemy intelligence agencies. At the first, outer layer of this grand mystification was impeccable work with facts and documents. Preparation for the transition into the shadows began long before H hour. In the medical records of the subjects, non-existent diagnoses were carefully entered, month after month. Doctors with the highest security clearance falsified cardiograms, substituted blood tests, creating a history of progressive illness. This was the art of creating a legend of decline. When the moment for activating the protocol arrived, the script was already written. The staging of a heart attack, a sudden accident, or complications after a planned operation was carried out with surgical precision. The key element here was not only bureaucracy, but also physical substitution. Laboratories working for intelligence needs had achieved incredible heights in creating mannequins and biomorphic imitations. Synthetic materials were used that felt like human skin, and the weight and distribution of body mass were copied down to the gram. In cases where a body demonstration was required for a farewell, makeup artists worked wonders using special compounds that did not run under the lamps and created a frighteningly realistic effect of waxy pallor, characteristic of the deceased. All this machinery worked for one result: to convince the world of the irreversibility of the event. Newspapers printed obituaries written by the best publicists, radio stations broadcast mournful music, and colleagues delivered speeches full of sincere sorrow. The most complex and cynical aspect of the outer layer was working with relatives. In most cases, the family remained in the dark. Wives were handed folded flags and orders. Children were told that their father had died a hero. This cruel decision was dictated by necessity. True grief cannot be faked, and any falsehood in the widow's behavior could alert enemy observers, who were always present at such events. Tears had to be real, fainting spells, genuine. The system sacrificed the peace of loved ones for the sake of preserving secrecy, turning the family's personal tragedy into a reliable shield for the operation. It was these real emotions that served as a guarantee that no one would doubt the reality of what had happened. However, behind the facade of mourning ceremonies and official papers lay a second, much more dramatic layer: the internal conflict of the departed himself. The person who agreed to the protocol signed a contract not with the state, but with his own conscience and psyche. Imagine the state of mind of someone forced to watch his world collapse while remaining physically unharmed. He saw his children's tears, but could not comfort them. He heard his legacy being discussed, but could not make corrections. In the first weeks after the departure, many subjects experienced euphoria from a sense of security and exclusivity, but it was soon replaced by profound depression. Psychologists overseeing the program called this the phantom life syndrome. A personality deprived of social confirmation began to disintegrate. Man is a social creature. We exist as long as we are seen, recognized, and called by name. When a name is erased from the facade of a building and carved on a tombstone, the bearer of that name loses their footing. In the closed bunkers that became a new home for the ghosts, time flowed differently. There were no weekends or holidays, no calls to friends. There was only work. Isolation became the price that efficiency demanded. To maintain sanity, many completely immersed themselves in the tasks for which this staging was undertaken. Analysts sat for days over decipherments. Scientists did not leave laboratories, developing technologies 20 years ahead of their time. They transformed into pure intellect, devoid of everyday distractions. But the price was monstrous. Archival records preserve diary entries of one of the program participants who described his state as life in a looking-glass world, where you see everyone, but no one sees you. He wrote about how agonizingly he wanted to simply go to a bakery, buy a newspaper, greet a neighbor, to perform those mundane actions that constitute the fabric of normal life. The deprivation of these trifles turned existence into an endless torment of sensory and social deprivation. They had to reinvent themselves, find new meanings in serving an abstract idea, since all personal meanings remained on the other side of the grave fence. Here we arrive at the third, ideological layer of the conflict. The non-existence protocol raised fundamental philosophical questions about the nature of personality and state duty. What is a human being? A collection of biological processes or a social function? The system gave an unambiguous answer. A human being is a resource. The value of an individual was measured solely by their usefulness to the common cause. In this paradigm, renouncing one's name, one's ego, one's own history, was seen as the highest form of asceticism and patriotism. It was a kind of 20th-century monasticism, where instead of monastery walls, there were concrete ceilings of secret facilities, and instead of prayers, launch codes and rocket fuel formulas. The people who agreed to the protocol became living embodiments of the idea that the common good is above private happiness. They were atlases holding the sky on their shoulders, but atlases invisible, nameless. The paradox was that by quote one, these people gained incredible power. Freed from the need to observe diplomatic etiquette, worry about reputation, or fear blackmail, they acted with terrifying efficiency. A ghost cannot be compromised by photographs with a mistress. A ghost cannot be bribed with the promise of a beautiful life. It has no life in the usual sense. They became ideal instruments of state will, pure conduits for strategic decisions. But this very freedom also gave rise to monstrous moral dilemmas. If you officially don't exist, then your actions are outside the legal framework. An order given by a dead man cannot be appealed in court. An operation planned by someone buried 3 years ago will leave no trace in official archives. This created the temptation of permissiveness, which each person dealt with in their own way. Some turned into cynical manipulators, moving pieces on a global chessboard without pity or compassion, while others, on the contrary, sharpened their moral sense, understanding that now they were accountable only to eternity. The situation transformed when external conditions changed so much that old secrets began to hinder the new reality. Years passed. The geopolitical map was redrawn. Yesterday's enemies became trading partners, and iron curtains rusted and crumbled. And then a problem arose. What to do with the, quote, two who had outlived their usefulness? The _quote _3 protocol was ideal for entry, but had no clear exit strategy. Resurrection was impossible. It would undermine trust in state institutions and cause an international scandal. You can't just bring a person to a press conference and say, "Sorry, we were joking 10 years ago." That would mean admitting to total deception at the state level. For the participants of the program themselves, this became a moment of terrible revelation. They understood that they were stuck in limbo forever. Their sacrifice, which seemed a temporary strategic necessity, turned into a life sentence. Many of them had already aged considerably by this time. Their health, undermined by constant stress and artificial existence, required serious intervention that could not be provided under conditions of complete secrecy. The threat of information leakage arose. An aging ghost could fall into dementia and start talking, could demand a meeting with their grown children. The system faced a cruel choice: continue to maintain expensive infrastructure for people who no longer brought benefit, or carry out the final project closure. The culmination of this drama unfolded in the silence of offices and hospital wards of special facilities. It was a clash of human hope with the cold logic of bureaucracy. Some returnees tried to rebel, sending messages to the outside world, hoping that the changed times would allow them to reclaim at least a part of their past. But the system, even weakened and transforming, reflexively protected its main secrets. History knows cases where the archives of non-existence were destroyed with such haste that along with the papers, the last traces of these people's presence on Earth also vanished. They were erased twice. The first time, solemnly and publicly; the second time, quietly and ruthlessly, turning even the memory of their secret service into dust. Those who reconciled themselves to their fate lived out their lives in gilded cages, surrounded by staff care, but deprived of the warmth of rodnych ruk, native hands, implying loved ones. They truly died in complete solitude, and their second funerals took place without orchestras or speeches, simply a numbered body lowered into an unmarked grave in a restricted area. However, there were exceptions, moments when history itself intervened in the plans of the special services. It happened that the knowledge and experience of the __2_ became critically necessary to prevent a new catastrophe. And then the phantom would make contact. Imagine the astonishment of a young operative when a person whose biography he had studied in history textbooks as completed half a century ago contacted him on his secure channel. In these moments, epochs merged. The experience of the old school, tempered in the crucible of global confrontations, combined with the technologies of the new age. These episodic returns were moments of truth, proving that the human factor cannot be fully digitized or archived. Living intelligence broke through the concrete slabs of oblivion, reminding us that true professionals do not retire, they merely change the level of the game. We feel the resonance of this practice even today. Although the methods and technologies have changed beyond recognition. In the 21st century, to disappear, it is not necessary to stage a physical end to life with a coffin and an orchestra. The digital age has provided new tools for creating, "3." Today, one can erase a person's digital footprint, change biometric data in databases, create a new digital identity with an impeccable history in a fraction of a second. But the essence remains the same. Power and influence require silence. The lessons of the non-existence protocol are more relevant than ever in an era of transparency. We are accustomed to thinking that it is impossible to hide in a world of smartphones and surveillance cameras, but history teaches us the opposite. The most reliable hiding place is in plain sight. If the system wants to hide someone, it hides them not in a basement, but in the stream of information, creating so much noise and false targets that the truth dissolves in them without a trace. The modern world has also adopted the psychological model of this phenomenon. Do we not see people today who live double lives online, creating avatars that have nothing in common with reality? Is not the concept of the right to be forgotten a humanized, softer version of the same protocol? We all learn to manage our presence and absence, dosing information about ourselves. But the extreme experience through which people of the mid-last century passed remains an unsurpassed example of self-sacrifice. It holds up a mirror to us, in which we see the limits of human capabilities. How far can one go for an idea? Can a person endure complete solitude, knowing that the world considers them dead? This is a test of spiritual strength that only a few have passed. These stories force us to rethink the very concept of historical truth. When we read textbooks, look at the life dates of great people, we must remember this is just the official version. History is not only what is recorded in chronicles, but also what has been erased from them. The gaps between the lines sometimes say more than the lines themselves. The shadows cast by figures of the past are sometimes longer and more significant than the figures themselves. The legacy of protocol non-existence is a reminder that reality is multi-layered. Beneath the thin crust of official news and generally accepted facts flow deep, dark waters of secret operations and hidden biographies. Returning to that rainy scene in the cemetery where we began, it is worth looking at it from a different angle. The man in the car, looking at his grave, is not just an observer. He is the architect of a new reality. The moment the last clod of earth fell on the lid of the empty coffin, he did not lose his life. He gained absolute freedom from it. It was the freedom of a ghost who can pass through walls and see what is hidden from the eyes of the living. The price of this freedom was unbearably high: the eternal cold of alienation and the inability to return to the warmth of human communication. The final thought that remains after studying these archives is simple and terrifying. We never know the whole truth. Those we mourn may continue to invisibly influence our destiny, and those we see on screens may be merely artfully created masks. Protocol. Nonexistence showed that death is not always the end. Sometimes it is just a transition to another status, the beginning of the most complex and lonely mission a person can undertake. And as long as there are secrets in the world that need to be guarded at all costs, there will be people willing to step into this darkness, leaving their names on granite to continue serving the light, or what they consider light, from a deep, impenetrable shadow. Their silence is louder than any words, and their absence is more palpable than any presence. This is the paradox of non-existence: to disappear in order to remain, to leave in order to continue the journey, to die to live forever, but not in the memory of people, but in secret folders, access to which will never be opened. The history of these people teaches us to value the name we bear and the life we live openly. For the ability to simply be oneself without hiding or concealing is a luxury unavailable to those who have chosen the path of service in the shadows. And every time you pass old cemeteries, where rains wash away dates on moss-covered stones, it is worth stopping for a second and wondering, did the story really end here, or did it turn into the channel here that determined the course of events for half a century to come? Perhaps the silence of the alleys holds secrets on which the balance of our world still depends.